Good morning, everybody. Keith Gertz unfortunately cannot be with us this morning, so as Vice Chair, I'm going to call the meeting to order and immediately turn it over to Chris Hopper.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Okay, so I will do introductions. To my left, we have Mike McLaughlin, representing Albany County, Tony Wilkinson with the Nature Conservancy, Elaine Balchinian, representing State Parks, Steve Rice, citizen member, Nancy Pearson, citizen member, Mike Lyons, representing the town of Colony, Rick Georgeson with DEC taking our minutes, Don Sapos, representing the town of Gilliland, and John Brust, citizen member. And I'm Chris Hauver, the executive director. Want me to go through everything, Wayne?
Yes, please.
Okay.
If any of the board members would not like that to happen, please let me know.
Right. So minutes from December 17th. Can we consider those? If there's any questions? If there's not, can we have a motion?
Make a motion.
Mike? Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Do we have any comments from the public? Richard?
The Friends like their 2 minutes of fame here. Just wanted to update you on the land project. Chris was able to help us arrange for a $3,000 match. And so we're guessing that we need about $6,000 to pick up these additional 31 acres. And right now we're up to 1,025, which if you double that, we're about a third. So we're right on track for the year to do that. We've set up a budget tracking system, and for the first time we put in money for 2 interns, $600 for 2 interns. We're starting to fund the science programs. So we're going to try to feel that out, how much is needed. Sometimes they'll need travel money, and we feel that the programs are really important in making it possible for more people to understand the importance of the pine bush. We're doing a lot of work with systems, so we're looking for, and this is where I'm asking for help. We've got QuickBooks going, so we're just starting that, but we don't have an audit. We don't have an official audit since quite a few years, and if we want to get a grant, we need an audit. Well, based on our budget, if we pay $5,000 for an audit, we're like crazy. So we're looking for help. If anybody has some inexpensive CPA connection that would help us do an audit, that would allow somebody to do an audit letter, then we could try to get some grants. And then the numbers might go up a bit from the 6,000 to something more interesting. So if anybody has an idea, let Chris know, let me know, let anybody here know, and they'll contact us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Anybody else from the public? No? Okay. Reports. So for Keith, I know Keith wanted to introduce Dusty Tinsley. Hi, Dusty. Dusty is an assistant regional counsel at Region 4 in DEC. And as you know, at the end of January, Larry Eckhouse, our counsel for the commission since 2009, retired. So Dusty has been assigned willingly. She was interested. That was the first test. Are you interested? So she's now our assigned counsel, and I've worked with her already on a number of projects. And I said, oh, maybe 1 a week, every other week. So probably 3 or 4 a week. We've worked on. But Dusty's great, so welcome.
Thank you.
And Keith would have done that if he was here. Anything from board members?
Along those lines, I'd like to recognize Larry's help, his accumulated wisdom and his steady hand as counsel were much appreciated by me, and I'm sure by others. It would be great if we could do something for Larry.
Yep.
He was one of I was going to say a rare attorney, but I didn't say that. But Larry was always trying to figure out how to make it happen, you know. And where Larry and a person in Larry's position can be overly cautious, Larry was protective of us, I think, protective of everything that's going on, while at the same time allowing us to go forward. And that, for me, it was just much appreciated. So I hope we can do something really nice as a send-off for him.
Yep, and I've mentioned that to him a number of times, and he said, I just need, I need to be in retirement for a little while, which is okay. He's actually coming in to meet with Dusty and I today to go over some files, but you'll see he's not here.
Okay.
So he's laying low for a while, but I said I'd like to have some sort of recognition for him, and
Yeah.
we'll definitely do that.
Great.
Anybody else? No? Okay. My report, I'll keep it brief. Let's see. Update on the landfill. I think I've kept you all pretty well abreast of things. Hey, Chris. Sorry. That's fine. Chris Spencer, representing the city of Albany. So I've kept you abreast through emails, and basically you saw some of the press that came out about the landfill. So the city came to the technical committee in February, and some board members were here, as you know, for that meeting and presentation from the city's consultants. And basically they presented what they feel is a situation that's much more significant than they expected when it comes to the actual restoration of the fully capped and closed landfill. The current permit that DEC requires is requiring of the city as part of their mitigation project for their landfill expansion is they have to restore the entire landfill cap and the current landfill that's operating, one closing cap, with pine barrens vegetation. That's actually a proposal that they came up with, the city's consultants, that they would do that. It's not something we recommended, although certainly we went along with it. So there's some significant issues that their engineers feel that they've come up with as far as erosion, and they had suggested in that meeting that they would come back to the technical committee and discuss some options. What those options are, we don't know. So the city will be back with their consultants to talk to the technical committee, and I'll make sure the board knows any of you that are interested to attend that meeting, probably in May or June. We have our annual field trip, which is led by Neil Gifford, our conservation director, June 7th. It'll be from 9 to 12. We'll leave from here at 9. We set it up for the technical committee. We always like board members to come, and any of you who have gone before, I know you've had a good time. You get to actually see the work that we do on the ground. This year we'll be overlooking at some of the habitat work that we've done. We did some fairly significant clearing of tree oaks and to open up areas back to pine barrens over by Rensselaer Lake. 6 Mile Waterworks on this side, on the Rapp Road side, which is basically the connection right through that landfill, the restoration project with the trailer park was. Anything else, Neil? That's right. Quick follow-up on the budget. So the budget process is well underway. I've kept you informed. The Environmental Protection Fund was proposed by the governor in the executive budget to increase to $300 million. And our appropriation was proposed to increase $200,000 to $2.675 million. That number has carried through in both houses. So both houses, the Assembly and the Senate, put their one-house bills together, their budget bills on Saturday. They released them, and session began on Monday, and I think the session is Monday, Tuesday, yesterday, and today. So they're working on those budget bills. They'll work through committees, and then they'll come to final numbers. Again, everything carried through the $300 million total, $2.675 for the commission. One thing to note, in the Assembly, there's a carve-out. There's a carve-out for $50,000 in the Assembly's one-house bill, specifically for Woodlawn Preserve. This would be a way for the commission to help Woodlawn Preserve without actually modifying our legislation. So our funding, instead of we can't spend our appropriation outside of the preserve. That funding would go to the city. We would work with the Friends and the city to help them appropriately spend that money on the Woodlawn Preserve, basically in clear alignment with our management plan, the way we manage our preserve. I don't know what's going to happen. It's not in the Senate. I haven't heard anything. I'll keep you posted. And just a reminder, the September meeting, which is September 15th? Thank you. September 15th. It was requested of me over the last 2 years, and I failed miserably last year, to try to get all of our elected and appointed leaders to that meeting. And I sent that message out back in February to you all. So if you haven't spoken to your representative, if you're a rep on the board, and you don't want to, that's fine. Just tell me and I'll do that. Delegate that right to me. But I know, and I talked to Tom. Tom's like, it's on Rose's calendar.
I know.
So that's great. So anybody else, just let me know, and I'll help you as you need.
Is that September 15th?
Yes. Thursday, September 15th. Is that bad?
No, it's good.
Okay. I didn't know if there was a conflict with the commissioner. All right. I'm going to leave it at that. I won't go into the report, the update that you get. There's a 3-page update of all the work that the staff has done over the last quarter. I want to make sure that you all go through it. I know you enjoy it, but I'm not going to belabor it because I'll keep us on track here. And that's it. Any questions for me? Okay. Neil, Technical Committee Project Review Report.
Good morning.
Thank you, Neil.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
All right, next time. Yeah. Sure, Mike.
My mother would approve.
And Chris.
The quarterly report pretty much speaks for itself. The technical committee has met a couple of times. And there are a couple of new projects. Most of what's in that report are continuations of projects that we've reviewed over the last, prior to the last time the commission met. Of particular note in that report is a growing trend, not only here, but throughout upstate New York, for solar farms, photovoltaic solar arrays, commercial. And there are 2 proposed right now for being considered within the Albany Pine Bush study area, both of which in the town of Colony on areas of open space that are recommended for full protection in our management plan. And one of them has actually submitted a formal application. One simply was investigating their options. So we've spoken to both, and both of those are working their way through the town of Colony planning department and eventually the planning board. And as you read through that, if you have any questions, I would be happy to entertain them. But since that was relatively straightforward, I have also prepared for you an update regarding the management plan. Recall that we're working through the 2010 management plan to review and update that, and we've already determined that there are some updates we want to make to that. So the staff are working on finalizing a new draft. And of particular note on the front of this is basically the same as I provided last quarter. But the bottom bullet there is that the technical committee and staff proposed a revised timeline. When we met previously, we had talked about potentially adopting the new plan, that you all would potentially adopt the new plan at your December 2016 meeting. We're proposing to bump that 1 quarter to a year from now, the March meeting of 2017. And if you flip it over, on the back, you'll see the actual timeline. And in particular, our plan right now is to have the first draft to the first draft to the technical committee in May. The technical committee will review it in May, June, and July. And we would provide you all with the final first draft of that in August. We would mail that to you separately outside of one of these meetings, and then potentially consider releasing that draft plan at your September meeting, September 2016. So we would potentially release that to the public and initiate the seeker review. Separately from this, I am meeting with the regional permits coordinator, Bill Clark, and the Region 4, Jim Eldred's actual title, environmental specialist, environmental analyst? Permit analyst. So I'm meeting with DEC permits to make sure that everything that we have proposed is consistent with seeker, and that may, depending on what specifically we have to do for seeker, that may modify the timeline a little bit. But the plan is to get you all a draft this summer for potential release in September, And then we would work through revising and seeker process with potential adoption a year from now in March of 2017. Any questions on either the quarterly update from the technical committee or the management plan timeline?
Could you give us your thoughts on the solar arrays, on the solar fields? Is there, I mean, it would seem that it would be a hard thing to compromise about,
Yes.
right?
Yes. One of them is the one that's before the town now is relatively small and discreet and on road frontage. And, you know, it's renewable energy. You can't, which is green and good for the environment. Ideally, it would be better to see these kinds of things proposed on sites that are already cleared or on the redevelopment of brownfields and things like that.
Yeah.
Not clearing 15 acres of forest, but be that as it may. So we shared those thoughts with the town. The second one is actually potentially significantly larger and it is in an area that we have proactively tried to protect multiple times since the mid-90s. And so we shared those concerns with the project applicants. Ultimately, we'll work through seeker and try and protect as much of these properties as we can. But yes, it is, as you suggest, it's a hard thing to compromise on. We need more domestic renewable energy.
Can you do habitat management underneath them?
Potentially. And those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about as a technical committee. Yep.
It sure flies in the face just with the aesthetics of the preserve. Whatever.
Yes. Agreed.
Upstate New York has a lot of areas that are open and green.
We do. And in my other capacity at home with the town, they're coming, and all of the surrounding towns, Washington County here, are putting moratoriums on and dealing with trying to develop regulations because the incentives from New York State are providing a good incentive to do commercial photovoltaic arrays, which is great if they're properly sited.
Yeah. The Department of State has a seminar in the next couple of weeks, I think. One of our staff is going, trying to help our municipal clients deal with this issue. Okay.
Yeah, they're going to be bringing that around the state. They're heading Washington County
Yeah.
in April.
Any other questions for Neil?
I can't remember the guidelines for when the report's supposed to be completed. It was I thought it was a 5-year.
It's entirely up to us. So what the law states is that once every 5 years we have to initiate a review of the management plan. How long it takes us to review and to do the review and to update it if an update is needed is entirely up to us.
So postponing this quarter is not going to affect that?
No, last time it took us 3.5 years to update, to completely adopt an updated revision from when we initiated the review. So this would be pretty expedited.
Yes. The law specifically, the commission has to consider whether or not to update or not, and then take an action, vote, right? And then have a hearing if we do that. So we did that. So we had the goal, so now we don't have to rush.
And that's specifically the commission's law, Article 46.
Well,
I'm looking for Dusty to be nodding.
The 2010 management plan was a considerable upgrade or expansion of what we have, not only in technical, but also in
Study area.
the study area boundaries.
Yes, that's right. Yep. Any questions? Good.
Do you need the board to formally adopt this new schedule? Okay.
You can, if you like, but you don't, not necessary.
All right. Thank you.
Right before, so Lisa's going to give us our financial update. I'm failing already as interim acting chair. Another report that I had asked Keith to do is the new Albany County Convention Center Visitors Bureau, the ACCVB, just came out with the Albany Top 40. I sent that around to you. This magazine brochure is a promotional piece that they did. There's copies here. You want to grab them on the way out. And the Pine Bush Preserve and Discovery Center are mentioned 6 times, which is nice. And just a reminder, Lupin Fest 2016 is May 14th. Here's the postcard that we have. They'll be going out, but I'll pass those around too. Sorry about that. Lisa?
Good morning. The first report in our statement of financials is our statement of financial activities. And we'll begin with revenue. Dues and contributions are higher than budget, and this is just due to our quarterly Trustco contributions are up for the year. Government grants and contracts, government income came in at 98% of budget and will come in very close to budget at year end. Mitigation fees are coming in higher than budget, and this is due to increase in tonnage from our landfill. Lease revenue is on budget for the year, and other revenue is 158% of budget, and this is due to an increase in both merchandise sales and programs. So overall, our total revenue came in slightly over budget through the month of January and will remain slightly over budget for year end. On to expenses. Personnel and fringe are under budget, and this is due to a lower benefit rate this year. We had savings in retirement and workers' compensation and reorganization. Travel and training is 50% of budget. This is due to savings in seminars. We had several in-house seminars that we budgeted for outside services. That will come in slightly under budget for the year. Contractual, we are under budget, approximately $200,000. And this is due to timing of various projects throughout the year. And will remain under budget for year end. Communications is under budget due to the savings in telecommunication, postage, and in-house printing. Occupancy is slightly under budget in January, and this is due to the timing for invoices for repair and maintenance. Supplies and equipment is under budget for January, but will come in over budget for the year. We reallocated some of our contractual expenses to supplies and equipment. Other expenses are slightly under budget, and this is due to a cost savings in insurance. So overall, our revenue came in close to budget. Expenses came in under budget through January at 103% and 81%, giving us a higher net income than budgeted of $681,000. Any questions on that? On to the statement of net assets, and before I begin this report, you will notice two new line items on the statement of net assets which will remain there, and this is due to GASB reporting, which is required government reporting on the New York State retirement system. One is under assets called deferred outflows from retirement, and one is under liabilities called New York State pension liability. The net effect of those two counts is very minor, at about $15,000. So I will begin that. Cash and cash equivalents. Our operating cash decreased by $1.2 million due to a transfer of cash into our reserve account. Our conservation and land reserves remain the same. Grants receivable increased due to money owed from DEC, and this has been paid. Accounts receivable increased due to quarterly mitigation money owed, and this has also been paid. Inventory remained the same. Prepaid expenses are under last year due to the timing of year-end expenditures that fall into our next fiscal year. Investments increased due to a transfer of cash into our reserve account. We are actually down for the year about $144,000 through January. Capital assets increased due to the construction of the Barron's House barn and a new boiler system we installed. And here's our deferred outflows from retirement. This is a new line item for our reporting requirements according to GASB. And this is essentially the payments that we make to the New York State retirement system that we hold as an asset. Adjustments come through. Okay, so total assets increased $706,000 over last year due to an increase in grants receivable, capital assets, and outflows from retirement. Okay, liabilities. Accounts payable and accrued expenses increased slightly over last year. Deferred revenue remained the same. And New York State pension liability, this is the other new line item. This is our trued-up actual liability as of 3/31/2015. And we will receive a trued-up actual liability on 3/31/16/17 and years after. Total liabilities increased $211,000 to our New York State retirement allocation. Capital assets increased $254,000. Reserved assets remained unchanged. And unreserved assets increased just over through January, giving us an increased total net assets of $495,000. Are there any questions on that? Okay. Next. give our investment report. The reserve fund had a slightly positive performance through January, and both the Discovery Center and endowment had a loss of 4.69 and 5.67%, and this is just due to the markets being down. Any questions on that? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just as an update, usually in the March meeting, we have KeyBank come in and talk about our investments. They'll be coming in June. So we'll have our audit, the report from the auditors, and we'll have KeyBank in June. Moving on to action items. So the first action item, the first resolution, action item A. Our procurement guidelines, our purchasing and procurement guidelines require that if we have multi-year contracts, that the board approve those. So we have two multi-year vendor contracts that are in front of us today. The first one is for Caro Real Estate. Caro is our current real property manager. They manage the building and the grounds for us, working with us. They have been the property manager since 2008. They were the low bidder for the first bid, the second bid, and this is the third bid, and they're still the lowest bidder. Their fees went up slightly from $20,000 to $23,000 a year, but it's still very reasonable, and they've done a good job. So that's a 3-year contract, and then the second one is for is with Cornell University, the Human Research Dimensions Unit, who we're actually going to hear from today. Graduate student Sarah Naiman. Is that right, Sarah Naiman? She's going to talk about the research that she's going to do and the whole background of the project. That's a $92,000 project over 3.5 years. So that's roughly $26,000 a year, and that ties in specifically to the strategic planning that we did. So it's tied directly into the vision strategy. Remember, the vision strategy was looking within our 10-year, and also our audience development plan. We've got our 10-mile radius, looking at our constituents and our target markets and audiences, looking at awareness of the Pine Bush Preserve and the Commission and the Discovery Center, knowledge and action. So bringing them through that continuum. So that's basically their project, and it's a social sciences project that we've never taken on before. And the deliverables are actually in the contract, and I'll go over those if there's questions.
Is it grant funded or right out of just your regular?
It's part of the DEC contract.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that you do not go over the details.
All right. Is there a second? There's a second. Mr. Brust and Mr. Sapas are always good at trying to keep me short. I could do much better. Is there any discussion? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Action item B is a conflict of interest policy. It's a new conflict of interest policy. The authority's budget office most recently recommended that all authorities adopt this more formal conflict of interest policy. We have one currently, which is a paragraph in the bylaws. This is obviously much more extensive, and you can see that. I worked with Dusty on it, our new counsel. She added some language about family as well, and it's something that we need to adopt and also post on our website. Are there questions about that? Is there a motion? Second. Mike. Questions? All in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Okay. And then our procurement and purchasing guidelines. I know these are all very exciting action items. Our procurement and purchasing guidelines needed to be updated to better reflect our contract. Our contract template is much more specific in regards to MWBE enterprises, and we needed to have our procurement and purchasing guidelines be reflective of that. So again, I worked with Dusty on updating our guidelines, and that's in your packet as well, and you can see what's what's new, the changes are tracked in that. And it is specifically an update for the MWBE enterprises, and it ties right back to Governor Cuomo's initiative to increase the number of MWBEs, or at least making it, the bottom line is a good faith effort. That's the key word, to really make a good faith effort to search out MWBEs when we're doing vendor contracts at a certain threshold. Any questions on that? Is there a motion? Second. Any questions? Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Any opposed? No. Okay, presentations. Sarah.
Want to do a brief introduction, Chris?
Yeah, that'd be great, Neil.
So as Chris suggested, Sarah's, as he said, Sarah's going to give us a presentation about the social science work. We're doing the social science work, as Chris said, as a direct outflow of the audience development plan that was created. It's another science project. The commission has never done social science research. And as all of you know, the most difficult part of conservation is not the biological science. It is not necessarily the stewardship, the actual activities of putting that science to work on the ground. The most difficult part is always garnering the attention and support and favor of the communities we live in where we're doing this work. Increasingly, not only us, DEC has done similar work with the Human Dimensions Research Unit, and other state agencies throughout the Northeast are utilizing social science researchers, which is real hard science, try and understand not only where folks are coming from, but also help us better connect with them so that they will hopefully support the conservation work that we're doing. So I've met Sarah's professor, Shorna, Dr. Shorna Allred at Cornell University through other research projects that she's been doing for DEC and other Northeastern Fish and Wildlife agencies. And it became clear that this is something that the commission could benefit from, in particular when we went through the audience development plan and realized that's the biggest gap that we have currently is having just that objective baseline information about where people are at with their knowledge, awareness, and attitudes within that 10-mile radius circle. So hopefully, if all goes well, we'll learn a lot from Sarah's research, which we anticipate, but also I hope to repeat this as part of our science program every 5 years, every 10 years, to hopefully gauge how well we are engaging with our constituency and getting them information that they can actually understand and appreciate. And it's a great pleasure to introduce Sarah, who is with Cornell University's Human Dimensions Research Unit.
Thanks, Neil. So as you said, I'm Sarah Naiman. So I'm in the Department of Natural Resources at Cornell University. And today I just wanted to do a brief overview of the Albany Pine Bush Project, which will be looking at attitudes and behaviors towards the pine bush. If this likes me, am I doing something wrong? Is this on?
There you go.
No? I can go to the
I'll go to the computer. You stay there.
Okay, well there's a couple. Okay. So to start, I am collaborating with several individuals, including Neil and Aaron here at the Albany Pine Bush. And then I have three other staff that or faculty rather, at Cornell. So Shorna Allred, Rich Stedman, and Jonathan Schultz, all who have experience in environmental social psychology, which means understanding attitudes and behaviors as they relate to the environment. Shorna has a little bit of background in political action, which has to do with understanding people's willingness to sign petitions, voting, writing letters of support. Rich Stedman has done a lot of work around place attachment and how place attachment can lead to different environmental behaviors. And then Jonathan Schultz does a lot of work with communication and identity around environmental issues such as climate change. So as Neil said, I'm part of the Human Dimensions Research Unit, which is in the Department of Natural Resources. And we're a group of staff, faculty, and students that utilize theory, quantitative and qualitative methods, and conceptual frameworks in order to look at the human aspects of natural resource management and policy. And so we fall into a wide array of categories that we investigate, but some of the four main ones, examples of them anyway, are environmental education, environmental psychology, natural resource policy, and then wildlife management and stakeholder engagement. And so I fall into the environmental psychology aspect, and that's where I'm going to be pulling a lot of the theory to apply to this project. As Neil said, this is the first time that Cornell University, in particular the Human Dimensions, is collaborating with the Albany Pine Bush. And so we're really hoping to add some of those, the theories and the methods that we're well experienced in to improve the effectiveness of the Albany Pine Bush programming and outreach efforts. So in order to do that, we started by looking at the Albany Pine Bush vision, so I'm glad that Chris kind of mentioned that. And so there were two main aspects of that that stood out to us that we wanted to investigate. The first was that core audiences are fully engaged and supportive of the Albany Pine Bush. And then the second is that the Albany Pine Bush is able to measure the effectiveness of their efforts through the actions of their supporters. So in order to measure effectiveness, as Neil mentioned as well, there's a need to understand the baseline, have a baseline understanding of people's attitudes, knowledge, and behaviors towards the Albany Pine Bush. This is especially the case since in recent years there has been a little bit of resistance towards some of the active management practices, such as prescribed burns. And so it would be really important to have an understanding of why individuals feel that way, and what types of approaches can be taken via outreach and education to mitigate that resistance around the pine bush. And lastly, the baseline would fall into helping the audience development plan, which was established in 2014, looked at different target audiences and strategies to improve support from those target audiences. So the baseline would allow the pine bush to be able to effectively measure how those strategies are working in the long run and whether or not they're truly being effective. With that being said, there are four main objectives of the project. The first is to look at the current level of awareness, appreciation, and action of the Albany Pine Bush efforts of residents within a 10-mile radius. And if you'll click the next. And so when I'm talking about action, conservation action, I'm specifically looking at place protected behavior, and that can include anything from signing petitions, writing letters of support, volunteering to remove invasive species, and things like that that will help to promote the preserve in the long run. We're also going to be looking at the impact and efficacy of the programs on both action, conservation knowledge, and appreciation, looking at the effectiveness of specific communication and education programs, and lastly, trying to figure out if there's any barriers to increase conservation knowledge and conservation action. And so with regards to how this will be applied, the findings will help to improve the Albany Pine Bush programming, outreach, and communication efforts, as well as Neil had mentioned, the survey tool that we're developing would ideally be able to be used at 5 and 10-year marks to see if there's any changes in people's attitudes and behaviors in the long run and see which programs are having the most impact. And lastly, within a larger context, so try to develop a survey and methodology that can help to improve the efforts of other organizations and environmental groups that have similar place-specific conservation behaviors. So I'm just going to go briefly into how to understand conservation behavior and three of the main theories that I'm integrating into this project. So I'm using behavior theory, place theory, and identity theory. And so for behavior theory, that's basically looking at being able to predict how people will act based upon different indicators. And if you'll, this is the funky slide. And another one. So for example, if you have, you want people to attend a bee education program, you're going to want to look at people's attitudes towards bee education programs at the Albany Pine Bush. Their perceived social consequences of either attending or not attending the Albany Pine Bush Bee Education Program, and then also the ability to attend the program. So for example, if they think that the program's only for staff, they may have a lower intention to go because they don't think that they can go, as opposed to if it's open to the public. And so the second thing I'm looking at is place. Since most of these behaviors are directly tied to the Albany Pine Bush, it makes sense that the preserve itself is going to have an impact on people's attitudes and behaviors. So I'm going to be looking at people's attachment to the physical aspects of the place, such as the trails, the actual species that are there in the Discovery Center, and their social attachment to the preserve, such as going on hikes in groups or Boy Scouts, activities that don't necessarily relate to the physical aspects of the preserve, but may impact their view of it. And so these have been shown to be pretty effective. For example, there was a study that was done in northern Wisconsin, where people that were attached to a particular lake were more likely to resist environmental changes to those specific lakes. And lastly, I'm going to be looking at identity. And so identity theory posits that we have multiple identities. For example, this person's a father, a businessman, a gardener, and an actor. And we organize these hierarchically, where the ones that are in that first bubble are the ones that are more likely to come to mind first. And you're more likely to exhibit behaviors based upon that first identity. So we want to look at what types of identities will lead to pro-environmental behavior around the pine bush, as well as how can we use education and communication methods to shift something that may be in this fourth bubble to that first bubble and make them more likely to support that pine bush in the long run. So some other examples of ways that this has been used with regards to parks in particular. In 2010, Hal Penny did a study in Canada that looked at Point Pelee National Park and found that people that had an attachment to the park were more likely to exhibit place protective behavior such as the petitioning, writing letters of support, avoiding sensitive areas within the preserve as well. And then in a larger context, people have also used some of these theories to investigate membership, joining environmental membership groups, doing environmental consumerism, and energy conservation. So what we're actually going to do in order to accomplish this, we're going to have two modes of data collection. We're going to be doing interviews and a survey. The interviews will be with 20 to 30 individuals that are a mix of staff, users of the preserve, and individuals that fall within a half-mile radius. And then we're going to be looking at the way that people use the preserve, their knowledge levels, the identities that they hold, and the attachment to the preserve itself. And the results and the findings of these interviews will help to influence our questions for a mail survey within a larger 10-mile radius. Again, asking questions around the same areas, but also about specific conservation behaviors, their attitudes towards the preserve, and their perceived social consequences and ability to participate. With regards to the outputs, we're going to have four main outputs. So for myself, I'm going to have a Human Dimensions Research Unit formal report, as well as a formal master's thesis that will come out of this work. But probably the most important thing for you folks is a non-technical summary, which will have the major findings as well as suggestions for next steps for the pine bush as a result of both the interviews and the surveys. And then I'll present these findings and suggestions to you folks as well. As far as the timeline goes, so I'll be starting my interviews in April of this year. Those interviews will then influence the development of survey questions over the summer. The survey questions will be finalized and a formal mail survey will be distributed in October of this year. And then next year will be data analysis and writing up of the reports, and I will be sharing the findings with you folks by the end of next summer. So thank you very much for your time, and please let me know if you have any questions with regards to the project.
Other questions for Sarah?
Oh, yeah.
I can say I like the idea of providing a survey that we can track through time. That aligns with our goals really well. In terms of kind of understanding the data that you collect initially, are there sufficient norms out there for comparison? Yes, we have within our 10-mile radius a group of people that are already engaged. They do convert this to action. Will we learn about that from the initial reporting? That is there enough norms out there to compare the results of your survey to now to kind of get a sense for our,
what people are actually doing? Yeah, so some of the behaviors that we'll be measuring will not only be future behaviors, like how likely are you to attend a Albany Pine Bush program, but also previous behaviors that have been exhibited. So how many times have you attended a program? How many times have you done certain things? So it will have some of those elements, if I'm understanding you correctly. It won't be totally comprehensive since it is the first survey that's being done, but it should still provide some information about what people have already done and where they're at now, as well as where they plan to do for the future.
I guess my question was, are there other comparisons where, like here's a national park and this is how it rates in that kind of context, or here's another preserve where a similar sort of thing has been done, that we can kind of compare the level of engagement of
Right.
our target audience, for example?
So there have been studies that have looked at park appreciation as well as park engagement. But given that the Albany Pine Bush has a very different context with regards to the active management elements of that, it's hard to try to compare across parks in particular. If we were maybe looking at forests, like national forests, and I haven't necessarily delved too much into that research or literature yet, but that is something that's on my radar to see if there is something that could be comparable. Yeah. Any other questions?
I just had a question for you, Chris. I think when you introduced this, you mentioned that it was $92,000 for 3 years.
3.5 years.
But your timeline only went to 2017, so I'm just wondering what happens after that?
It actually wraps up, it wraps up through March of 2018.
It rolls into the beginning of our third fiscal year.
Okay.
Yeah.
The timeline is a little bit different since I'm a master's student. I have to have my stuff done within 2.5 years. So I think that may be part of it. And I've also already started on some of the project this last year.
And we actually started as 1 year in January.
Already well into 1 year.
Okay.
And then it moved to USP.
Yeah.
Oh,
Which is why
that makes sense. Yeah.
Are there other questions for Sarah? Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Next up, we have our own illustrious scientist, Dr. Campbell. I'll let you load that.
Oh, I can just work here.
Yeah?
All right.
Look.
That fan over here.
Right. This kind of thing?
Yeah.
Thank you for
Okay, thanks, Neil. I think many of you are already at least somewhat familiar with the Carter Blue and our recovery efforts here at the preserve. I think, however, there's a few of you that have maybe not seen much of this before. So before I give you an update on the results from the 2015 field season, I'm going to give a little bit of background that'll be an introduction for those of you who are not as familiar, and for those of you who have heard some of this before, consider it review. So this is what the Carter Blue butterfly looks like. It's not a very big butterfly. About 2.5 centimeter wingspan, or about a 1 inch wingspan. So with its wings closed, it's not really much bigger than your thumbnail. All the individuals look like this on their underside. Males and females look different on their upper side. The males tend to be a bit bluer. The females tend to be less blue and have these orange crescents on the trailing edge of their wings. Historically, they have occurred in oak savannas out in the Midwest, south of the Great Lakes, and pine barrens in the Northeast. However, humans have destroyed a lot of these ecosystems through development. So currently, Carter blues occur in remnant savannas and barrens habitat, and they also occur in anything that kind of resembles that vegetation structurally. So things like forest openings like clear cuts, power line right-of-ways, or airports. Anything that's kind of that grassy, shrubby type of habitat. And of course, we need one ingredient. This isn't just the vegetation structure is enough. We need to make sure that there's wild lupin out there, because that's what the Carter blue butterfly larvae feed on. The larvae only feed on that plants. Okay, here is a typical year in the life for the Carter blue. The eggs that overwintered hatch out around April, and the larvae feed on the lupin. They grow, they develop, they pupate, and then the first brood of adults emerge around May. They live for about 2 to 5 days. During that time, they mate, they lay eggs. Those eggs then develop, and then those eggs develop, they hatch, the larvae feed on lupin again, and then they grow, they pupate, and then the second brood of adults comes out around July. And then those guys then lay eggs that overwinter, and that completes the annual life cycle for the species. And that gives rise to what's known as a bivoltine life cycle, or 2 generations per year. And so here, this just shows a schematic of the adult abundance over time. So you have adults emerging and dying off. This represents the first brood, and this represents the second brood. So there's 2 broods per year. Okay, the Carter blue has experienced a greater than a 90% decline in distribution and abundance since about the 1970s. So populations are hanging on in Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, and maybe Indiana. They think in the last couple of years that the population has become extinct within Indiana. But it's hanging on in these states. The New York population here represents the only natural population east of the Great Lakes. There is a population in New Hampshire, but we don't consider that natural because this population actually went extinct a few years back and has since been reestablished with captive individuals from New York. So to help prevent the further decline of the species, it was given legal protection by the DEC in New York State in 1977. The DEC listed that as endangered within New York State, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listed that as endangered across its entire range in 1992. Now, when a species is listed as endangered, a recovery plan has to be developed, and within that recovery plan are actions that need to be taken to recover the species. And also within that recovery plan are criteria that are used to determine whether or not the species has been recovered. And so for the federal recovery criteria, they're calling for one or more viable populations in all 13 recovery units. So these stippled areas that you see here, these are the different recovery units. So they're looking for one or more viable population in all 13 recovery units. And the Glacial Lake Albany recovery unit, federal recovery unit where we are, they're calling for 3 viable populations. So there are 4 state recovery units within the federal recovery unit. So there's Queensbury, Champlain, Sarah, West. So the federal recovery criteria is calling for viable population 3 of these 4 recovery units. Within the state for these recovery units. And that's, we're looking, in order for the population to be viable, we need at least 3,000 adults in either the first or second brood in 4 out of 5 years. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background on the butterfly. Now I just wanted to briefly mention some of our recovery efforts at Albany Preserve. Okay, so because it's such a expression, the blended aspen and white pine have come in. Has also led to the invasion of non-native species such as black locust, and has also led to the establishment of really thick patches of scrub oak. So a lot of the preserve, at least when it was initially established, was not high-quality pitch pine scrub oak barrens. And so as a result, it wasn't high-quality butterfly habitat. So obviously one of the Commission's primary goals then was to restore much of these degraded areas back to high-quality pitch pine scrub oak barrens. And so given that goal, habitat management is one of the significant portions of our work at the preserve. So now I'm just going to give you just a couple of the different types of habitat management that we do. There's a lot more than what I'm going to show you. But this is black locust. This represents kind of some of the most dramatic habitat management work that we do. This is a black locust clone. It's very, very different than what pitch pine scrub oak barrens should be, and this is completely unsuitable for the Kerner blue, as well as many other butterflies. So the best way to deal with these black locusts have been to cut them down, remove the logs, rip up the stumps and bury the stumps. Any of the pitch pines that might have been hanging out in the canopy, we keep those. And we're pretty much starting from scratch here, so we go in and we plant native vegetation, and among some of that native vegetation that we include in there, we include lupin, and we include some of the native nectar species that butterflies need. And then hopefully after a few years of growth, we wind up with something like this. Something else that we do considerable, we do a lot of, is mowing. So you get these thick patches of scrub oak. So to prevent these things from becoming thickets, oftentimes we'll come in and mow them, set back the succession, open up the area. These thickets, these scrub oak thickets will really shade out a lot of the other native species. So we come in and we mow it, and that really opens it up and creates a lot of opportunity then for other species to basically not be shaded up by the scrub oak and grow. However, scrub oak is very resilient. Within a few years, it usually bounces back. So mowing is something that we kind of have to continually do. And then, of course, we also manage habitat by reintroducing fire, and we do that through prescribed burning. The goal is to do about 200 acres per year, and thanks to Tyler Briggs, our fire specialist, we've met that goal for the last 2 years. We've burned over 200 acres in the preserve in each year. So this is another way that we can kind of set back succession, open up the habitat, and keep the forest from closing in from surrounding areas. Okay, we also, I should add, so once we restore patches in here, the butterflies don't just show up, at least not right away, especially in some of these more isolated patches. So we accelerate the colonization of those patches through captive rearing and release. And we've been doing this since about 2008. So what we do is we capture gravid females here at the preserve, so females that are carrying eggs. And then typically Neil will drive those over to the New Hampshire Department of Fish and Game. They tend the females, they get the eggs, they raise the eggs, they raise the larvae, and then they typically send us back these beefy looking Rice Krispie things are the pupae. So we get them back from New Hampshire's pupae, and then when they get ready to eclose, we put them in these butterflies tents with a nectar source, and then soon after they eclose, basically eclosion is when they emerge from the chrysalis. Soon after they eclose, we release them into the restored patches. So these just show you the sites that we've released at since 2008. This past year is these grayish purplish areas here. This is where we released in 2015. And this shows you here our effort since 2008. So these green bars are the number of pupae that we've received from New Hampshire Department of Fish and Game, and then these adults, and these blue bars are the number of adults that came from those pupae. So in 2015, we released about 1,400 adult butterflies, and this is a total of about 8,000 butterflies that we've released since we started doing this captive rearing and release program. And if you're wondering here, there's this vertical dashed red line. This separates from 2011 moving forward. We started rearing the butterflies, or rearing the pupae indoors. Prior to 2011, we put them outdoors. And so you can see, after 2011, we brought them indoor. You can see almost every pupae we got, we were able to turn into an adult butterfly that we were able to release. But you can see, in 2008 and 2010, those were particularly hot years. And so those were when the pupae were allowed to emerge outside and fly directly into the restored area. We still had reasonable success, but you can see a lot of pupae got cooked in the sun out there. So that's why starting in 2011, we moved it indoors, and we've had very high success in terms of turning those pupae into adults that we then released. Okay, so hopefully by this point I've given you some idea that we're putting a lot of work into recovering this butterfly. We want to know, are our recovery efforts working? Particularly, we want to know, are our populations increasing? And if so, how are they doing relative to the state and federal recovery criteria? And remember, the recovery criteria is we're looking for greater than 3,000 first or second brood adults in 4 out of 5 years. So in order to determine if recovery efforts are working, we need to monitor abundance. We need to monitor population size. And specifically, we need to monitor brood size. And so brood size is just the cumulative number of adults that have emerged over a flight period, or over a brood. So you have the time from the first adult emerges to the time that the last adult emerges, and we want to know how many adults have emerged, how many butterflies have emerged within that period. That gives us an estimate of our population size. Okay, now I just want to briefly describe how I go about oh, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I wanted to show you, this is where we've surveyed for abundance in 2015. So all these blue patches, these green patches represent places that have been planted with lupin at some point in the past. And then these blue patches are the areas that we've surveyed. So if we zoom in on some of these blue patches here, all of these patches are covered with a series of transects. Our field techs walk these transects multiple times in the spring and throughout the spring and the summer, and they count the butterflies along these transects. And so in 2015, they visited each of these sites, all these blue sites. They visited them 24 times. They visited them 10 times for the first brood and 14 times for the second brood. So we're visiting these sites a lot, which is good. Okay, now I just wanted to briefly describe how I go about estimating brood sizes. It seems like it'd be pretty easy to figure out how many butterflies there are. That's not the case. There's actually, it's a bit more complicated than even I thought when I started this. And so I'm just going to give you kind of a big picture conceptual approach. I'm going to spare you the details because I don't want to see your eyeballs roll in the back of your head. So I'm just going to kind of give you just conceptually how we go about estimating this. And so we start with the raw counts. These are the counts of the butterflies that the field techs see. They walk along the transect surveys. They count the number of butterflies. Now, as you can imagine, when they're out there walking, they're not seeing all the butterflies that are actually out there. They're missing some butterflies. So they're only seeing a proportion of butterflies that are actually available to be detected. Or you can think of this another way. You can think of that any given butterfly only has a certain probability of being detected, even though it's actually there. So what we do is we adjust our raw counts by this proportion of butterflies that we're missing. We want to know what proportion are we seeing. So we adjust our raw counts by this detection probability to figure out how many butterflies were actually out there, to estimate how many butterflies are actually out there. So suppose during one survey that they go out, they walk all the transects and they count 100 butterflies, but we know that they've only encountered half of the butterflies that are actually out there. Okay, so if they counted 100 and they only counted half, our estimate is that there's 200 butterflies out there on that particular survey. So it's 100 divided by 0.5, right? So conceptually, this is very easy. That's the gist of what we do to get from our raw counts to abundances. But this P here is very deceptive. There's a lot of work that goes into figuring out detection probability. We have a specialized way to collect the data that allows us to get a P, and then there's this whole suite of statistical methods that have been developed to getting at this detection probability based on how we've collected those data. So I want you to know it's hard. This isn't something easy to do. There's a lot that goes into it. So this is the first step. It's a two-step process that we use to get to our brood size. So we get from raw counts to abundances by adjusting by detection probability. Then what we do is we fit an insect population curve to these abundances. So these are the abundances for one brood, and we fit this insect population curve. Now this insect population curve has, the shape of this is controlled by several parameters that have important biological meaning. So we have, one of these parameters is the start of eclosion. So that's the first day that an adult emerges from a chrysalis. Then we have the length of eclosion. Over how many days did individuals from that brood emerge? The mean lifespan, on average, how many days does a butterfly live? And then this is what we're interested in here, is brood size. So these parameters control the shape of the curve. It controls when does the curve start to increase, how quickly does it increase and decrease, how wide is the curve, how tall is the curve, okay? So what we want to do is we want to find the curve that best fits these abundances. So we change these parameters until we find the curve that fits those data points the best. And then the parameters, values of those parameters on this best fitting curve is our best parameter estimates for these quantities. Okay, again, I'm glossing over a lot of details of how this model fits. So if people really want to know, they can ask me. But that's kind of the conceptual approach to how we go about getting here. And I just wanted to do that to kind of demystify some of what it is, how we go about from just counting to actually getting to brood sizes. Okay, so now, you guys probably wanted to see, you probably didn't want to see that, but you might have wanted to see this. This just show you, we'll start with the number, basically this is the area that we've surveyed, starting back in 2007, when we started measuring brood sizes. And you can see that we have an increasing amount of area that we're surveying over time. And this reflects our restoration efforts. As we restore these areas, we release butterflies into these areas, and we incorporate those areas into our survey efforts. So we're seeing an increasing trend in the amount of area that we're surveying. This past year we surveyed about 50 hectares. Hectare is 100 meters by 100 meters. If you don't know what a meter is, then we need to all be on the metric system is what I'm saying. So this is now, if we overlay the brood size curves onto this graph, we can see that early on there were some fluctuations, but pretty much for the last 6 years we've seen a steadily increasing brood sizes, both first and second brood sizes. And remember, our recovery threshold for state and federal recovery was 3,000 individuals. And we first exceeded that threshold in 2013 with the second brood. And then pretty much for the last 3 years, we've been over that with either one or both broods. Culminating in 2015, here where we have about 14,600 individuals in the first brood and about 18,700 individuals in the second brood. Oh, and keep in mind too that these estimates that I showed you are only from these blue areas where we surveyed. There's other areas out there that likely contain lupin and butterflies, but we didn't count those, and I'm not projecting my estimates to those areas for a number of reasons. But so keep in mind that the estimates only apply to the blue areas that we actually surveyed. So these estimates that we're seeing here are very likely to be conservative. So in all probability, our population is even higher than this. Okay, and now as probably has come to a surprise to nobody, that the butterflies are not necessarily equally distributed among all the different populations, all the different sites within the preserve. All right, so to show you this, what we did is we've grouped the lupin patches based on into subpopulations. And those groupings are based on their proximity to other patches. So anything within 200 meters of another patch is considered within the same subpopulation, unless there's geographic barriers, which here are primarily roads, divide them. So obviously these are all within 200 meters of each other, but because we have roads, 155, Old State Road, dividing some of these subpopulations, we consider those separate subpopulations. So here shows you how the different subpopulations contributed to the second brood in 2014. So you can see almost half of the second brood occurred within Kings Road Barrens, so the orange population out here, orange subpopulation. And then most of the other half was within Pine Bush Southwest, Pine Bush Southeast, and Barren House. So here, here, and here. Okay, now it's important to note though that these contributions are not fixed. These are not static. The vegetation is constantly changing out there through succession and through our management. So how much each of these sites and subpopulations contribute is always in flux. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, like here's 2015. Here's the contributions for 2015. And you can see now the two big contributors are still Kings Road Barrens and Pine Bush Southwest, but notice they've almost changed in terms of their contributions. So these things are very much a fluctuating thing, but the important thing that we're after here is that all our eggs aren't necessarily in one basket. By diversifying and getting butterflies in all different subpopulations, we're hopefully buffering ourselves against any sort of catastrophes. And understanding these types of fluctuations, like they're doing well in some sites in some years and not others, okay, that's really the next step to take these data. If we can begin to tie the changes in abundance to changes in vegetation, that's going to really put us in a good position for understanding and maybe even predicting how our management will affect butterfly populations. So now I've mostly looked at just population size with these things, but there's lots of other stuff that we can do with these data. Especially we're starting to get now a pretty good stretch of time. This year, this field season will be our 10th year in which we've been estimating brood sizes. And having these longer time will allow us to start to ask and address some interesting questions about the cardinal blue butterfly. Here's one example that seems to be particularly relevant given our current weather. Climate change is likely to become an issue for the cardinal blue butterfly. And having these longer time series will allow us to start looking at some of these changes over time. So here's a very simple, maybe even an oversimplified analysis of how this can be affecting the cardinal blue. Now remember that I mentioned to you when we're fitting those brood size curves, when we're fitting those insect population curves to estimate brood sizes, one of the other things that we get is this data first eclosion. So when does the first adult emerge over time? And so I've just plotted these for each year for the first brood and second brood. And I've just fit a simple regression to these. And what we notice here is that we're seeing a decrease in basically the data first eclosion is getting earlier over time. Now there's a lot of variation. This trend isn't statistically significant, but it is still suggestive that the eclosure of the first brood is getting, date of first enclosure is getting earlier and earlier. But interestingly, it's not really happening for the second brood. Okay. So obviously, what the kind of effect this is going to have on the Karner blue is going to require a lot more study. But what I'm getting at here was this: is with these long-term data sets that we're starting to collect are going to allow us to start answering or start addressing questions like this. So I don't want to leave you here hanging with this potentially bad news scenario of what might be happening with this. So let me just remind you here that here in the short term we have very good news. We have our population is doing very well. Again, we've been over the recovery threshold for 3 years in a row now, and in a lot of other places within the Karner Blues range, they're losing populations. So populations are declining in many other parts of the range, but here we seem to be doing very well, and I think that's in no small part to the efforts of the Commission. So thanks, and do you guys have any questions?
Did I hear like there was a third brood one year?
Neil?
I didn't do it.
I would not have called it a third brood.
Okay.
Because I don't think it was a population level response. We had a few individuals that persisted beyond what we call the end of the second brood. But it could have just been a bunch of like a wacky, some late emergers, or maybe it was a few individuals that popped off a third brood. But it wasn't like we had a full-size third brood. We went out and we looked and we saw a couple individuals. People got like, oh no, a third brood, and that was about it. It was basically just those few individuals, and it never really amounted to anything more than that.
And then I have a second question. Can I ask one more? So at the beginning you talked about the federal recovery plan and the need for, I think it's 3 viable populations in New York?
Yes.
So that's going to mean that we got to get 2 viable populations in Saratoga County?
Yes, this probably Saratoga West and Saratoga San Plains are the best.
So West is the airport and the San Plains is Wilton?
Wilton, yeah.
And are they doing this level of work?
Yes and no. They are. I think they are doing the same things. I haven't seen their data yet. They are collecting, doing the same methods that we are.
And they're doing releasing?
They are not doing releasing. I don't think their populations have been, I think, stable. Because going back to when we started this, I think their populations have generally been higher, so they haven't had to release. But I haven't seen their numbers yet. They gave me some of their data back, I think, the 2012 data, and I did some of their numbers then, but I haven't seen any of their data since then. So they're collecting these data in the same way that we are, but basically it's going to be on me. Eventually they're going to dump the data on me and say, here you go, tell us how many we have. But I haven't seen that in the last, probably 3 years.
Which is good. Yeah, so the San Plains looks really good. The Saratoga West, which includes Spa Park, and the airport, is doing less well. The airport has been doing some additional management work.
But the airport used to be gangbusters, right?
Yeah, the airport used to be
and
the
then
biggest population. But Kathy's not excited about the numbers of the raw number of animals she's seeing there. They're persisting at both sites. But the airport needs something.
Yes.
Do you monitor the winter weather? Or was that kind of something you'll be thinking about too, as to what the different, like, just because we know this winter was completely different from the last one, how that might affect what comes?
Yeah, well, I think, qualitatively, we have some guesses of what might be happening this year. We think probably without the snow cover this winter that the butterflies might actually be declining. And the mad scientist in me wants to see the population decline, because we want to understand how much, if the population, if we get hit with a bad winter, how far is our population going to decline? How well are we doing with our management? So like I said, I want to see the population do well, but I also want to see, this will be interesting to see what happens after this winter. Now, except for that one weekend, though, it wasn't a particularly harsh winter, so it wasn't like it didn't get the 1-2 punch of no snow and bitter cold all winter long, so maybe it won't be quite as bad. But to answer your question in a more quantitative way, I think, yes, we can start to look at, we have our weather station here, where we can start to look at some of the things. And really with these butterflies, I don't know a lot about this stuff yet, but I'm sure I will, is they respond to degree days, like how many days has it been over a certain amount of temperature, because that's going to affect when they ultimately emerge. And so that's what I said. My thing was a little bit naive. I just fit a simple linear regression through start dates and said like, oh, is there a decreasing trend? But really you'll probably explain a lot of that variation if you look at how warm was it leading up to that date of first enclosure. Because if there's many warm days, they'll emerge sooner, and if there's not, they'll emerge later. So yes, we have some of those data available, and when I dig into it more, then we'll start to look at those types of data.
And the Federal Recovery Team does have a committee of mad scientists who are putting every life stage of the Carter blue through growth chambers to look at the influence of various climate scenarios through all 4 life stages, including overwintering conditions. So we're getting some really good data about what their lethal limits are, what their lethal limits are not, what percentage of animals die under various conditions. And Dylan this winter has created a citizen science program looking at having citizens around the preserve collecting winter weather data for us, in particular snowpack. The correlative with corners and lupin is a minimum snowpack. Lupin is Texas bluebonnet, so wild blue lupin goes all the way down south. The range of lupin, where the overlap between lupin's range and Carner's, correlatively, is a minimum winter snowpack. So there's a lot of questions about what will happen as you're already seeing that snow line move farther north, and the minimum number of days of having snow. What Ralph from the USGS thinks is that it's not so much snow, but winter temperatures. As Steve alluded to, they have a thermal limit of about minus 15 to minus 20 degrees will kill eggs dramatically. So if we don't have snow to insulate them, and we get those cold weather, that cold weather repeatedly, that could have a big impact. But as Steve alluded to, there are a lot of questions, and the Federal Recovery Team is investigating all of that. And Dylan, one of the many citizen science projects that she's created, is to try and get at more useful information for here.
You know, I think something that might play out into that is like they're doing everything in a lab, which I think is good, but I feel like, you know, it could depend on what side of the dune they're on, where they are in relation to like plant and microhabitat. A lot of those things can probably mitigate some of the hard, like, boom, this is the temperature that they go. And so yeah, I think these are all going to be interesting questions, and some of that we'll be able to get with how we're, based on just the data that we're collecting with our group size estimates and some of the other data that comes from that, but some of these we might have to initiate new studies to look at some of these things directly.
Steve?
Yeah. Just kind of eyeballing your data, it looks to me like the biggest populations of butterflies, at least contributing to the pine bush population, are coming from the most intensively managed sites, the ones that we did the most intensive management on. Is that true? I mean, that's really
I think
quite remarkable, because you think if they're not coming from these places like out back. I always think, geez, that's the kind of target habitat we're looking for. They're coming from these newly created habitats. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of Kings Road Barrens, just across the road that we're seeing that is where there's a lot of scrub oak out there, and we mow the scrub oak, and usually within the year or two after the mowing, when the scrub oak's really low and the lupin is all exposed, they seem to go gangbusters there, and then the scrub oak starts to grow up after a couple of years, and then we start to lose it. And so it seems like that if we keep hitting that with a mower every couple of years, we're going to have really good butterfly habitat there. Now, one of the other big sites was Comet. It used to be a white pine stand. They thinned the white pine stand and planted with lupin, and the lupin, you can't walk out there without stepping on lupin. It's wall to wall. That currently has most of the population now, and so that doesn't have the scrub oak component. So that probably won't have to be as heavily managed early on. But I'm kind of curious to see what's going to happen with that one. But yeah, they do seem to not be very bothered by the management where we're mowing. They actually seem to like it. And I'm wondering if we should be heavily managing areas like that just to keep the population up. But that's a discussion for
a bunch of other species too, from other scientists that we have in the preserve, particularly for the rare insects, but also for some of the reptiles and amphibians. Their highest populations, including some of the rarest things, are in the sites we're managing the most intensively. Mowing, burning, herbiciding scrub oak.
But knowing we mow down the scrub oak, we're not doing the birds any favors, and so there's always going to be the balance of like when we're trying to consider multiple species in the landscape. Like we want to do some for we want to benefit the butterflies, but not necessarily at the detriment of all other species in the preserve. So that's always has to be the balance when we're managing.
Other questions for Steve? Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a brief executive session where we just need to approve minutes, and I can give you some updates on some of the real property. So can I have a Motion to adjourn regular and go into executive.
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor? Thank you. We'll be back in